Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Dan Powers, Executive Director of the Society for Science at User Research Facilities, and we're having another session of our 2022 annual meeting, this time with Cara, who's going to be speaking to us about engagement and communications and outreach to inform people as to the benefits of the technologies and research going on in user research facilities. Before Cara comes onto the screen, let me frame out a little more of the discussion that we're going to have. The framing of her presentation was based on a question that I posed to her, is really how can user facilities design user engagement activities both on-site and virtual? Coming out of the COVID time, we have both the benefit and silver lining of learning how to do things digitally, but want to do things in person as much as possible again. But in terms of those communications, how do you create alignment with stakeholders between their needs, their research interests, and the mission and capabilities of your given user facilities? This is some of what Cara is going to be able to describe. We've been looking at examples of how user facilities build credible and compelling stories that inspire scientists to look to come and make proposals and use their technologies. And we're going to hear some examples from Cara as to how this is happening at the user facility where she works. All right, so now as Cara comes onto the screen, let me give you a little bit of her background. She's the Senior Public Affairs Representative with Brookhaven National Laboratory and at the National Synchrotron Light Source II, NSLS-II, that you've heard some previous session speakers referencing their work there. Her duties include the creation and management of various external communication materials, such as articles and website content and brochures and posters, and social media and stakeholder communications, together with the NSL-II and the additional user facility management. She creates and executes the strategic communication plan for the facilities, including branding and marketing. So in particular, I'd also asked Cara if she could speak to the Summer Sundays program that they have and other ways that the branding of the user facility has been growing over the last couple of years with that mix of both digital and on-site digital and virtual only outreach that got started and almost was necessary during COVID time. And now, of course, back into more on-site in-person visits. So Cara, welcome to the screen. And I'll turn this over as to a bit of a presentation from you, but we also are intending to have this as a conversation. So you could tell me if you'd like me to stay here and interact with you, or if you'd like to run through a few slides first as well.
I think we can start with the interaction right away.
Okay.
And
hello, nice to see you again virtually.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Yeah, so you already talked a little bit about NSLS-II. That's the user facility I'm at.
Mm-hmm. And tell me then, in particular, how have things evolved since last year when you actually spoke to us about some of the on-site or at the time more virtual lab tours and how that could work? Where are things now in terms of that stakeholder engagement and communicating the mission and the capabilities of the lab to people who, some of them will remain virtual, others though can get on site? What kind of programming is the latest mechanisms that you're using?
So we currently have quite a hybrid model. So for engagement for stakeholders, we have returned to having on-site tours, so stakeholders can come back. So we had officials from New York State and other groups come. We had already a couple of user group. The user program already started full, so we have full house of users. But additionally to that, grad students and other students from universities can come back and tour the facility to see it. Mm-hmm. So that has been ramping up a lot. Many of our workshops and conferences are still virtual or hybrid. So there we retain that model because it's, as we have heard in the previous session, offers the opportunity for many people to join who might not be able to travel to our facility, but still would like to learn from it. So for example, our users meeting next year that's coming up end of April will be fully virtual again, because it allows all our users to join from wherever they are.
Okay. That's
without
right.
having to worry about visas, coming to the US, or any other travel issues that come with traveling so far just for a conference.
Yes. Let me ask you then, to sort of follow that thread a little bit more. In terms of agenda for user meetings, an annual user meeting that is going to be virtual, what type of structure for sessions or panel discussions, et cetera, have you found work best, in essence, to garner the kind of attention that you would like?
Our last two users meeting that we held virtual were fairly well attended, and they followed, I'm going to call it a little bit more the classical model of how we used to do it in person as well. So you have a day of plenary sessions, but then you have, over the course of the following days, multiple workshops that are more tailored to specific audiences with different kind of invited talks. So the plenary sessions are usually well attended. And the workshop attendance really strongly depends on the topic of the workshop. Since we want to give our user community the opportunity to propose different kinds of topics, so all our workshops come from proposal from the user community, or mostly from the user community, so it's not prescribed by the facility. Also, it's not just NSLS-II for our users meeting. We're doing it together with the Center for Functional Nanomaterials, so we have a second user community here that has overlap with NSLS-II, but doesn't need to. And this year, we're going to premiere a third facility in that meeting as well, the laboratory from BioMolecular Structures, which is a cryo-EM facility. So again, we have some overlap in the user communities, but not a full overlap. That means that the workshop topics will be spreading out across a number of different topics, from material science to catalysis and energy materials, to protein crystallography, to nanostructures. So it's a very broad spectrum of different kinds of workshops that we expect to have. We don't have the list of workshops yet, so I can't make any promises what topics will be there. But due to that, the workshops have a fairly variant attendance, because the communities for different topics are just different sizes for our facilities. So there's no one amount of attendees can be expected for all workshops. Right.
Well, then let me build on that and almost step back to the proverbial 10,000 foot level and ask you about the branding strategy. As you're bringing on an additional user facility, and your role, and you're charged with some strategic decisions and how you communicate the overall mission of the laboratory. How do you, what do you, I don't know if it's a how or a what, how do you go about strategizing what is the brand of the laboratory? What factors go into just that conversation?
Oh, wow. So that's a really great question, but it's definitely a hard one for a scientific laboratory. So the overall laboratory that we are all in, all the three user facilities I just named, is Brookhaven National Laboratory. And the laboratory itself went through a branding exercise 2 years ago, where our new beautiful logo comes from, which you can see, and the new colors. I was part of that branding exercise, and when you're trying to build a brand, you don't start externally, because the person who will carry the brand is actually your staff, because they're the biggest ambassadors for your brand for a scientific institution, because they're going out to conferences to speak to their peers. They're going out to universities to give lectures. They're interacting with users at the beamline. So if you want your brand to be conveyed to them, you have to get your staff on board. So of course we did when we branded Brookhaven Lab, and that also folds into NSLS-II a little bit, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is We of course went outside and looked at the external audiences, how is the lab perceived right now and everything, but we also looked inside. We spent a lot of time with focus groups just from staff and asking them, how do you feel about the lab? What do you see us to be? Who are we from your perspective? And those are basically the questions we answered, and in the background working on that. Who are we? What are we doing? And what makes us different from other national laboratories? So those are the questions we ask our staff. And we also try to figure out, what does it mean for us? So we found answers for that. NSLS-II has a set of answers that the staff can use when they talk to everyone, and they are designed so they don't include the big $10 words and stuff like that. They're very, very basic to make sure that everyone who works at the facility, regardless if they're the director or one of our electricians, can use them to explain what they do here to their neighbors. So that was really important for us. Based on that, we have traits that we would like other people to see in us and that we're striving for. And those traits help define the color scheme for the lab.
Okay.
So then you go from what you want to say to how will it look, because there's a whole psychology to colors. So we had a really good design team look into that and say, okay, if these are the traits that you're looking for, that we're striving for, how do they affect, how can they be represented in colors? And then of course, that also shows a little bit in the logo. You have a cube that is a building block, but a hexagon is also a building block, which we're building on the fundamental knowledge of physics for our high energy physics program that we have at the lab. But if you look really closely, the little B really looks like a little synchrotron, at least to me, in the logo. So you find all these little aspects in our branding that try to combine who the entire lab is.
All right, I like that's very subtle, but yes, I think for parts of the relevant scientist audience's brain, that will resonate.
So I can show you a couple of, so then when you have that kind of foundation, we started out building materials, of course. What can we give our staff and external people, so stakeholders, users, visitors, that will carry that. So that's then where the visual part comes in. Redesigning the homepage, bringing the new colors in, bringing the new logo in, redesigning the materials that they all look similar. I mean, this background is one of the things that came out of that. It has the whole new branding. And then for the user facilities, since they are such an integral part of Brookhaven Lab as a whole, we had sub-brandings for those. So both the Center for Functional Nanomaterials as well as the National Synchrotron Light Source 2 have their own sub-branding that work with the Brookhaven Lab in itself, but still give them its own visual identity, which was really important to us to stand out as a facility, but also have something where our staff can say, this is ours. This is how we look. This is part of what we do here.
All right. All right. Did you say there was something you wanted to show, or?
Yeah, I can show you a couple of, I mean, my slideshow has a couple of different visuals that I can share. And I can take you through to the branding part if you like.
Yes, yes. I think because we will
do this.
Be interested to share this with some of the other communications staff with various labs. Everyone's very interested in the vein of best practices sharing and seeing, well, how are they doing it over there? This is very interesting to our communications staff amongst our network. So
for everyone who didn't know, this is how NSLS-II looks. We're the silver shiny donut on side. And as I said, my presentation is mostly just images to help with answers to my questions. So for NSLS-II, when we started the branding, we also asked the question to our staff, who we are, what we do here, and what we do, how we are different. And so we worked with a group within our own staff to figure out the answers to those questions. Then we work with management through them and stuff like that. And then in the end, we based on those answers, we defined a new vision statement, a new mission statement for the facility, and then found answers to these questions for our staff to be used. And then that goes hand in hand with all the material that we do and all the information we have on our website. So,
could I ask, this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but that re-clarifying of a vision and mission statement.
wow.
I see the slides are back up here. All right.
Can we go one more? Does it work? There we go. Yeah. Those are the branding words, that vision and mission statement that we came up with.
Okay. All right, and that process, so you're building off of input from various users, staff, and then what kind of group or just smaller committee ultimately is the decider for this? Because I know that's just often a complex or fraught activity, is revamping a mission and vision.
So for that specific statement, it was our what we call our executive management group. That includes the director, but also our deputy for science, our deputy for construction, our deputy for operations, the manager of the user office, communication, education, and outreach department, our ES&H department, our yes, I think our budgeting group is also part of that. So it's really going across the entire facility and not just the scientific areas.
Interesting. All right. Thank you. That's just some interesting context of how this decision gets made.
Input from the staff, we solicited it different ways, and we also had a questionnaire for our UEC, our user executive committee, that they answered and helped with input for this. So this was a fairly involved process to hear a lot of voices, to make sure that everyone felt involved and engaged. If we go to the next slide, we can see a couple of the different materials that are using the branding. And of course, you see the slides already, so they look a little bit different. They don't have the bright green, but a gray underneath. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, why the overall color is gray. But you can see there's a scientific poster, we have PowerPoint presentation. The big image on the left is the desktop screen. So if you go to the 2ID beamline at NSLS-II, you will see that all the computers have that. All of our beamlines have their own. So the name of the beamline and the tag for each beamline is on them. You see report covers, so a triennial operations review or a dummy cover for our next one. You see the idea of a flyer, connect cards. So those are social media cards where people can scan QR codes and look into our social media accounts. So we thought through what are the most important materials that we need for an external audience, but also for the internal audience again. I mean, our staff needs to go to conferences and needs to present posters. So the scientific poster is important. Similarly, the PowerPoint presentation. If you go one more slide down, there's more branding materials.
I see down there. Okay, then the particular, even the colors relevant to a given beamline.
Yeah, so NSLS-II has 5 major sectors that are color coded. This is where the red, orange, yellow, green, and blue comes from. And this is where the different tag colors for the beamlines come from. So if a user comes and they know they need to go to the orange building, they don't need to remember the number, but they can see from the outside driving around the facility which one is the orange building, go there and find their beamline there. And that carries through to our website. So if a user goes to our website and looks at our beamline directory online, they will already see that color. So the tag that says 17 ID2, the beamline that they might want to go to, has already that orange, that number, the building is orange. So it's really pulled through everything to help the users to use it, to locate it, but also to give the beamline an identity, and help with that as well. So it serves both function, a branding function, but also just a function for the users to orient themselves.
Yes. All right. Very savvy.
And that is why our overall general color is gray, because we have the 5 really bright colors that go with our beamlines. That are usually also will be somewhere in the material shown. On the right top corner, I have the 3ID tag. So every hour, and I already talked about that. It's really important to have materials for your staff that your staff can use to carry that with you. So every beamline has that kind of an image and can put them on any PowerPoint presentation, all their documents, and they can have that in digital form and just can download it. Similarly to the beamline poster that you see in small, so no one can read that, but it's basically a huge poster that usually hangs at the beamline. It has the main contact, an overview. It talks about the scientific scope of the beamline. It has scientific examples, and it shows the optical design. So it's designed to inform users who walk around and are interested in different beamlines. So it has a couple of technical information. But if you give a tour, for example, you can also stop at the posters and point at the data image or at the optical design and just speak about it.
Yes.
So there are 2 different ways to use these posters around the ring. And the other 3 icons on top is our beamlines are sorted, or our whole facility is sorted in different groups. And each group has their own little icon. So the first one is the accelerator. So it shows the Linux, the booster ring, and then a piece of the storage ring. The second one is our data science and system integration group, who takes care from everything from integrating motors to writing AI software for the beamlines. And the last one is just one of the science programs we have.
Right.
Just as an example. So those are the ways we try to integrate the entire branding, not only for the external audience, but also for the internal audience.
Yes, that alignment seems extremely efficient and would minimize any confusion. But more so from your perspective than on communication staff, having a confidence that the consistency of how any given laboratory is described, both internally or externally, is really going to be very high, and avoid any confusion. All right. What else would you describe there? Not necessarily this slide. I mean, what else? What else would you like to tell us?
We can take a look at the website, how it's integrated in the website. So if you go up to slide 3, sorry, we're jumping a little bit between the different slides. One more.
That's right. And we have extra time, actually. No, there's don't feel a time crunch.
So I took a screenshot of the website. You can see that on the right-hand side. And I picked my favorite XKCD comic. I don't know if everyone is familiar with XKCD. It's an online comic series, usually about math, science, but it sometimes also picks at other things. And this is my favorite comic because it helped me to rethink why I'm doing my website.
The only common thread is the name of the school.
Yes. And at least I myself often, when I go to other institutions and look for something like, oh, they worked with us recently and they published a paper, I want to find a news article that they might have written. I stumbled through their webpage and I'm getting lost. So when we redesigned the NSLS-II website, we tried to figure out what are the things that people who come to our website actually need compared to what are the things that we want to show them. Because a website needs to serve both purposes. It needs to show our message, but it also needs to actually serve its audience. And this is our solution. I'm not saying that there is a perfect solution for every website, but this is what we did. So we have a top menu that is very, very small here that gives you information about the accelerator, the beamlines, the general science and research. It has a specific tab just for all the information users need. and it's just called for users, so as obvious as possible. Then we have one tab that is for industry. And then of course there is staff, jobs, and we have research and development as well in there. So, but then the three main things people come to our website to look at are the three buttons underneath the image. That's the user's guide that tells people how to get beam time at our facility, because that's the main driver why people go to our website to submit a proposal. The machine status. When is the machine running? Is it running? What is it doing right now? It's really important. And then the operating schedule, which is when is the next shutdown? So those are the really important things that our external audiences seek. Mainly our users, of course, but they are one of our most important audiences. So if someone stumbles on our website and doesn't know what it is, in the banner, there's a really little text, which can't be read right now, but it says, what is the Synchrotron light source to? And if you would click that, it would roll out an information text and give you a basic explanation of what it is. So this is where we pick up the general public for this website to say, okay, I ended up here. What is this place? And that's where you can find the answer. And then the next section below the buttons are where we have our news, science highlights, announcement, and conferences, which is, of course, the things that we want people to know about us. So this is then where our desire to communicate what our staff is doing, what awesome science comes out of our facility, what conference are they hosting, what kind of events are we doing in the future comes then into play. And what you can't see, the last little point, it says science programs. This is then where you would see those icons that I already showed you on the branding slide, where you can then deep dive into the science that we do.
All right. Very helpful. Well, the logic behind what has been emphasized on the website is really quite clear, and something that perhaps any given lab or even a university, since the comic there is your reference, could take to heart as to here's a good way to choose what to emphasize, and the smaller headings up towards the top are really where, for what might seem to be, say tier 2 stakeholders or visitors who can then easily find the topic area that would be of interest to them. But you've obviously very reasonably looked to emphasize those 3 key links for the most likely visitor and known stakeholder group that's visiting your website. Could I ask you, I'm thinking of the previous session that we had relative to the diversity, equity, inclusion theme, and you may have seen towards the end of that conversation, the discussion got to how outreach from given user facilities to lesser engaged communities, perhaps to HBCUs, et cetera, would be something that any given facility should work on, that, like, just do more outreach that way. How would that theme be something you perceive included in your branding and your messaging?
So for NSLS-II, a lot of that outreach goes actually through our director's office. John Hill, our director, is a champion for minority institutions, and he is spearheading a program across Brookhaven Lab that engages minority serving organizations. For him specifically, he works with Howard University, and he goes there 2 times a year, talks to the faculty, gives talks, and the faculty visits us, and there's an exchange program. Brookhaven's Office of Education and together with the Diversity and Inclusion Office of the lab, organized the project. So we're very, very grateful that we can piggyback on that and work with them to come. Aside from that, especially institutions that are also far away or don't have the funding to travel really profited from our push to remote experimentation during the pandemic. Many of our beamlines have developed capabilities to run experiments remotely, and we still accept users that only run remotely, so that they don't even come to the facility. So they mail their samples here. And there's a fraction of that, depending on the beamline and depending on the kind of experiments they do, who come here or who don't come here but still do experiments with us.
Right.
So that's definitely part of that. So how does that play into our branding and strategy? The branding, of course, tries to be inclusive in the sense that we want to include our entire staff, regardless from whatever background they're from. So this is why we engaged so many people when we created it. And that does not necessarily only includes professions, but also backgrounds, languages, cultures, and so on. So that's the when we build it site where I see that topic in there. And then of course, for reaching out, it really depends on the yearly strategy. NSLS-II has a yearly communications plan where we outline what kind of activities we want to do and want to move forward on to reach different different audiences and different groups. And for this year, we have a couple of things that are mainly focused on the website again, to have something that can be shared, explain the purpose of the facility for those audiences, and then in turn can be used by staff. And we of course encourage staff to go to conferences and connect with different audiences.
All right. Thank you. I know that was somewhat off topic, but just building off of earlier sessions and the conversation that got going. With just a couple minutes left, were there any other slides that you wanted to show us, or another topic that you would like to highlight?
I mean, you started off with Summer Sundays and I glossed over that one at the beginning, so we can talk a little bit about the Summer Sundays. I have slide 2, so if we go up one slide, that shows 2 pictures of how Summer Sunday worked prior to the pandemic. So we had people come from the communities, see what we're doing at the facility. So there were different stations that they could interact to. On the left-hand side, you see our vacuum station where we blow up peeps or shrink them, and the children are very excited. So Summer Sundays are usually geared when they're on site towards children.
Okay.
But of course, the adults also love it. So on the right-hand side, you see a little model of NSLS-II that the Makers Club of BNL built. So a shout out to those people who love to build models here in their free time. That it was fantastic. And it has lights and everything, so you can learn how a little synchrotron works and move your way through from starting the vacuum to starting the magnets, injecting electrons, so starting the lights and stuff like that. And the hatches have even a little interlock that you need to close the doors before you can let in the X-rays. So it's a very intricate little model.
Yes.
During the pandemic, we did them virtually, and I talked about it the last time. This year, we actually had the beautiful opportunity to go into the different communities. So we had 3 Summer Sundays, and just for the general audience, Summer Sundays is a Brookhaven-wide initiative. NSLS-II usually only has one a year. That's our day of open house. And then the CFN has their own. And our high energy physics machine has another one, and the learning center. So they're usually 4 pre-pandemic. So this year we had 3 across the island instead of at the lab. So we went to different places along the island and engaged with the audiences there. And we brought the vacuum chamber we brought there, or the little NSLS-II model from our side. But since they were all Brookhaven Lab, we were intermixed with the other activities as well, which was really interesting seeing what other people are usually doing for their summer Sundays. If we go to slide 7, I brought a number of slides that I showed for these kind of things. So they were just rolling through and showed a beautiful data image. There's a picture of the control room. If we go one slide down. So those are slides that were made for the general public to look at. We have one data image in the next slide. We have one data image that is very lovely because it shows the diffraction pattern from a very small sample. So the rings are the diffraction pattern, but you can also see the vacuum pipe. So it's not data that will be used in a paper. They retook that data, but it's just a beautiful image that shows you the really big parts that you can see with X-rays and the really tiny
yes,
atoms. So those are the kind of things we took to the community to talk about with them. There were also talks involved in that. So it was very interesting to do these offsite summer Sundays. For next year, we'll be back at the lab and there will be tours again for NSLS-II. So we are very excited of having the public back at the building.
Great. Thank you for sharing those examples. And as I mentioned in conversations with other communications staff from various user facilities, the kinds of outreach, it seems that the Summer Sunday program in particular would be of great interest to other labs to, in essence, understand how you schedule them, what kind of topics you choose to create exhibits around or models around, and how you track who the audience is. Any of those, that could be another conversation. And much as all the sessions for this annual meeting are intended to be a foundation, if you don't mind, Cara, I'll be using this as some outreach, an example where we share this conversation we've had with other comms folks and say, hey, would you like to have another focused conversation on maybe pick a particular theme, and let's share how each of the labs are doing this, and just get up to date on what people are finding works the most. And particularly coming out of COVID time, as you're describing it in 2023, there's this hybrid of, all right, the silver linings of what we figured out to do in a virtual sense, we'll keep those. And then here are how we get back into the in-person scenarios that also people are very interested to have that experience again, back to as if it was 2019 all over again. But
Yes.
thank you again for creating the slides and that information regarding branding and just making time for us today. And thanks everyone in the audience for participating and just observing what is happening at Brookhaven, and more particular with NSLS-II and the labs that Cara is responsible for the messaging around. We will, as I mentioned, build on this communications theme with additional webinars, and perhaps we should look to create a SSURF field trip or site visit for NSLS-II when there's also going to be a summer Sunday happening somewhere in the community. That would be nice.
It will be in July, so
okay,
you have a little bit of time to plan your field trip if you want to.
All right.
Observe the summer Sunday at NSLS-II.
Okay.
You're very welcome.
Great. All right. Well, we will build on that idea. I didn't have that in mind before the conversation got started. Another great thing about having some in-person sessions here online. Thank you again for the time, and thanks everyone for participating in our audience. We'll look forward to seeing you later this afternoon at another session.